I am an amateur photographer on a mission to capture the desert in bloom, an event I consider to be a programmed miracle. It is my intent in this video not only to show and explain the varieties of flowers and their complement to the landscape, but how this yearly event reflects the glory of God in His creation. In many cases, we may know and understand the biological and geological processes and parameters which underpin the bloom, such as germination, soil type, meteorological processes, nourishment, the Calvin cycle, anthocyanins and carotenoids, etc., while not completely understanding others, such as photosynthesis, or the evolution of flowers, which Darwin considered an abominable mystery. However, it is just as much a mistake for a scientist to demand the need for God only to explain a process for which an explanation has not yet been worked out, as it is for believers to retreat to alternate explanations which reflect very poor science whenever a scientific explanation is found for a process previously attributed only to the divine. Both errors relegate God to the fringes of human knowledge and completely ignore the possibility that God is involved in what we do understand every day. These questions come to the forefront when standing before a field of endless flowers which only 2 weeks before was open, barren desert, lifeless as the surface of a moon, or a hillside of seemingly dead scrub waiting for the rangeland fires. We start in Death Valley, one of the driest, hottest regions in the world. The bloom begins low and climbs high, and this place is the lowest of the low, 282 feet below sea level, and the hottest, having recorded a temperature of 134 degrees Fahrenheit. But when the rains are just right, it explodes forth in Phacelia and Gravel Ghost. In this photo, we see an area known as the Artist's Palette, a melange of mineral-rich soils, a soft blanket of desert gold coating the Bajada, an apron of debris which surrounds the desert mountains. In this photo, you see the same. In the early spring of 2015, Death Valley experienced a superbloom. The superbloom began low, starting at the southern end of the valley. I arrived at its medium point, the Black Mountains. In this shot we see more of the ubiquitous desert gold coating the Bajadas above the chemical desert. As I drove south along the Bajada of the Black Mountains, flowers began to increase to this point in which the Black Mountains were surrounded by desert gold. This shows a typical photo of Death Valley that year, some badlands, in this case the badlands above Furnace Creek, and these show the Funeral Mountains, which stand guard over the valley, burning with the intensity of the desert gold present along its slopes everywhere. Here we see the desert floor beneath the Grapevine Mountains, alive with desert gold and Phacelia, and here Death Valley Buttes from just below Hell's Gate. This area came alive with yellow cups. The names bestowed on this landscape by a lost party of gold seekers accentuate the stark harshness of this barren landscape and heighten the miracle of its bloom. Phacelia and yellow cups are seen just below Hell's Gate on the way back into Death Valley, in the valley floor. Here is the Panamint Mountains, seen from an ant's eye view, looking at purple matte and desert gold beneath the snow-capped mountains. The flowers mainly bloom on the Bajadas, which are desert soils derived from the eroded material from the mountains above. Desert gold covers the Bajadas, leading down to the salt pan, which is known as the chemical desert, home only to the salt bush, as seen beneath the Panamint Range on a cloudy morning. Here is a closer view of Telescope Peak from across Valley Bajada covered in desert gold. Death Valley is a deep graben, a sink in the earth caused by extensional forces in the basin and range. There is nothing wrong with the soil. It grows like any other soil, in this case being eroded from volcanic rock, which alters to clays, which trap water, which the flowers can then tap. The process even happens in a dry area with mud cracks. Phacelia bloom from mud cracks on the floor of Death Valley, royal purple from the dead land. The mud cracks are all that remains of an ancient sea which once drowned the valley but has since dried up. Phacelia is seen mixing with yellow cups, desert gold, and gravel ghost. In this photo, we see the highway that leads into Death Valley. It follows Furnace Creek Wash. Furnace Creek seemed to introduce the flowers into the valley from above. But in fact, flowers tend to grow more in washes due to the flow of water. This photo shows Borrego Springs, California, a sandy landscape in Henderson Canyon, which is pierced by sand verbena, white evening primrose, and desert gold. Sand verbena and primrose were to be found everywhere in the sandy landscape. Borrego Springs is an oasis in the rain shadow of the Southern California batholith, nursed by water rising along the many faults that undercut the area. It is known as one of the most seismically active places on Earth for its folk art sculptures and for its impressive sand blooms in early spring, such as these evening primrose, which begin to open around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Henderson Canyon, when not coated by verbena and primrose, is a sea of desert gold, which intermingles with and finally replaces them. The spring bloom starts near sea level and then climbs at a rate of about 2,000 feet per month to the tops of the Sierra Nevada and the Rockies. Borrego Springs is perennially one of the first sites to bloom due to its proximity to the low elevation Salton Sea. We see badlands surrounding the valley on the east side, with brown-eyed evening primrose, sand verbena, and desert gold. The Santa Rosa Mountains in this photo are seen over the flower-dressed dunes of Borrego Valley. The flowers do not live long past their peak, as they are a delicacy to the sphinx moth caterpillar, which in staggering numbers wipes out acres of blooms in a matter of days. In this photo, we see more of the same: primrose and verbena surrounding creosote flats, a sea of sand. The Borrego Valley is noted for its sandy desert soil, which supports the ubiquitous sand verbena and its companion flora, the evening primrose. This photo also shows desert lilies. Dunes, which are more common in the Colorado Desert of Southern California than in any other North American desert, support flowers. The flowers, once commonplace, are now threatened by Sahara mustard plants, an invasive species which has infested the Southwest, taking root a full month before the flowers. In this photo, we see the highlands of the Southern California batholith rising in the distance over the valley. As long as volunteers continue to remove the Sahara mustard plants, Borrego Springs will continue to be a safe haven for these harbingers of spring. In this photo, we see Ford Dry Lake, one of the many barren spots that is visible from the interstate on the way from Phoenix to Los Angeles. But in the spring, we see it coated also in primrose and sand verbena. Closer to Phoenix, in Arizona, Saddle Mountain is known for its population of wild owl's clover. The owl's clover has become more and more rare, appearing once every 10 years rather than once every 5. Here only a small patch was found, even in a very good year, in which the desert received a soaking over the winter. Instead, Saddle Mountain is more often now found ringed with bladderpod mustard flowers. The early bloom in Arizona, also, like in California, starts low and heads high. When the bladderpod mustard meets the hills, the vegetation changes. From seas of bladderpod mustard, Mexican gold poppies are now to be found, intermingling with lupin and fiddleneck. These are seen on the Rainbow Valley Trail in the Estrella Mountains of Arizona. Normally brown, a good winter's rain, or a sparse one, perfectly timed, will bring about a green desert, with flower hotspots coating the land where the rainwater meets the seeds. In this photo, we see another early site, Picacho Peak. Picacho Peak is a volcanic neck of rock standing on the desert between Tucson and Phoenix. It is one of the steepest peaks in Arizona. It is one of the first sites to bloom, producing fiddleneck, lupin, and penstemon, but it is best known for its gold poppies. A jagged ridge connects the eastern and western promontories of Picacho Peak. During the Civil War, it was the scene of the westernmost battle of the war. In this photo, we see poppies blooming between Picacho Peak and the remainder of the Picacho Range photographed. Poppies will grow in most places under about 3,500 feet in the desert, but are to be found most commonly in soil derived from basaltic rock, or scoria. The remote Gibraltar Mountains in western Arizona are a collection of several common geomorphological desert features, including low sandy flats, deep gorges, and volcanic basalt outcrops, like these, which after the rains come alive with scorpion weed and yellow cups. Scorpion weed, a close relative of the California phacelia, imparts a painful rash to those who brush against its leaves, and everlasting memories to those who gaze on its fields. Yellow cups swarm around a basaltic outcropping in the foothills of the Gibraltar Mountains in this photo. And in this, lupine, yellow cups, and beavertail cactus grow plentifully around the edge of the Gibraltar Mountain wilderness. Further upstream, we find the Lightning Bolt Trail, a feature of Buckskin Mountain State Park. Like the Mexican gold poppies found further east, yellow cups bloom prolifically on basaltic outcrops. Beavertail cactus features microscopic spines which bury themselves in the skin of those who touch them. They're very difficult to remove. In this photo, we see 3 beavertail cacti surrounded by a sea of yellow cups. The same flowers surround a beavertail cactus on the Colorado River at Buckskin Mountain State Park. Back downriver at the Dome Rock Mountains, the scorpion weed rule, with very little yellow cups or any other flowers to be found. The Dome Rock Mountains are the first highland feature encountered on the drive into Arizona after crossing the Colorado River. In this photo, a young saguaro is surrounded by scorpion weed with a smattering of yellow cups. And we here see scorpion weed mats covering acres of rolling desert in the east foothills of the Dome Rock Mountains. I found this site at sunrise, as sunrise catches the hills west of Quartzsite, as Ocotillo and Palo Verde look on fields of scorpion weed. The rolling hills beneath the Dome Rock Mountains go on and on, coated with scorpion weed. In the distance is Middle Camp Mountain. The hillsides are lit up with regal colors in early spring, a surprise in Arizona's normally parched western desert. Just outside of Phoenix, a boulder on the Black Canyon Bajada is surrounded by Mexican gold poppies, a hint of things to come. One of 4 broadly recognized species, 2 of which are annuals, the Mexican gold poppy does in fact contain alkaloids that produce a mild sedative effect when medically introduced. However, the effect is far less than the opium poppy. Again, we see the Bajada Trail at White Tank Mountain Regional Park in Maricopa County, with its population of Mexican gold poppies. Looking south from the Bajada Trail, a saguaro overlooks an early spring field of poppies. Bladderpod mustard, in a field before the northern White Tank Mountains, which are known for trapping winter rain cascading over several waterfalls, is seen in this photo. Often the first to bloom on the open desert in early spring are the carpets of bladderpod mustard, so named for large seed pods that form late in their life. The White Tank Mountains are known for their petroglyphs, water sources, and as a home for large saguaro cactus forests, which in this photo is seen surrounded by bladderpod. Another perennial site is known as the Black Hills. On the way to the Black Hills from the Gila River Valley is San Jose. In March 2015, poppies were found blooming near San Jose with snow-capped Mount Graham in the background. In the central Black Hills, a field of Mexican gold poppies is found. Stunning rock formations are found throughout the Black Hills and form a perfect backdrop for fields of Mexican gold poppies. The Black Hills Scenic Byway snakes past poppy fields in spring in this photo. The Black Hills are a volcanic plateau in the transition zone between the Basin and Range and Blue Mountains in southeastern Arizona. In this photo, you see early blooming bladderpod mustard in a field in the Black Hills. And in this photo, Mexican gold poppies and bladder pod mustard intermingle on a hillside overlooking a butte towering over the Triple C Ranch. Just outside Phoenix, the Rolls, as it is known, is a low region of sharply parallel low hills just north of Saguaro Lake in the foothills of the Superstition Mountains. The area is traversed by the Bush Highway, which includes this flowery vista of the Four Peaks, a landmark east of Phoenix. Poppy fields appear in early to mid-March on the flanks of the Superstition Mountains, as seen from the Bush Highway. The fields surround creosote and brittlebush, which in good years can intermingle. In exceptional years, the poppy bloom lasts into late March, creating a double bloom with perennial brittlebush. This photo shows the weaver's needle appearing over a patch of poppies, having closed their petals for the night. Back across the Colorado River, a tiered bloom begins at Joshua Tree National Park on the Cottonwood Bajada. In this photo, we see desert dandelions and brown-eyed evening primrose. This photo shows the Cottonwood Mountains and their apron of flowers. This photo shows lupin, desert dandelion, brown-eyed evening primrose, chia, and Mexican gold poppies. The Orocopia Mountains across the valley from the Bajada from the Cottonwood Mountains stand in barren contrast to the landscape of the national park here, as naked trees are surrounded by poppies and primrose. A river of lupin and primrose spilling down from the Cottonwood Mountain Pass is seen in this photo. The Cottonwood Bajada is a zoned bloom, beginning with desert dandelions and primrose, then ascending zones of poppies and lupins, primrose and lupins, and finally this zone of chia and desert dandelions near the pass. Here we see the poppy lupin zone, invaded by a few daring primrose. One of the most stunning sights in Arizona is this site, found on the Apache Reservation near Globe, known as Peridot Mesa. Here we see Peridot Mesa in spring, carpeted in gold. There is perhaps no single unified effect more powerful than the singular dominance of the poppy when it arrives at Peridot Mesa and its billions of members. Here we see the mesa surrounded by an army of flowers. The bloom complex at Peridot Mesa is actually two landforms, Peridot Mesa and Peridot Hill. They are a volcanic mesa composed of basalts which contain some of the purest olivine in the world. They are mined here for the gem quality of the minerals and their purity. At Peridot Mesa and Peridot Hills, the poppies grow so thick it is impossible to walk among them. Only along the roadside may vistas like this be enjoyed. The view from the top of the mesa includes the tri-tip peak in the distance. Gold poppies gradually merge into the seas of bladderpod mustard which surround the mesa. Northeast of Phoenix is to be found Bartlett Dam, one of the epicenters of the bloom in Arizona. If you seek flowers in the desert, head for a water source, and none pleases like the perfection seen at Bartlett Lake, with its ledges of gold poppies and lupins above the lake. It is the hillsides, not the lake shore itself, which host the great blooms at the lakes. Bartlett Lake is an artificial lake on the Verde River, with ledges of gold poppies and lupins. Poppies, lupins, and tuberosa, which are the red flowers seen in this photo, begin in the hills of the Mazatzal Range at Bartlett Lake. Here the lake is seen beneath one of its many ledges. The lake is a reservoir store for the city of Phoenix. Here the Mazatzal Mountains are seen from the foothills surrounding the lake. Bartlett Lake is decorated by ledges overlooking the water of intermixed tuberosa, lupin, and poppies. What makes Bartlett Lake so very special, however, is known as the home of the albino poppy, a genetic anomaly in which the flower blooms without its characteristic carotenoid orange. Sometimes they are called ivory castles. Later in the year, the brittlebush begin their bloom on the hill slopes above the lake. California's answer to Bartlett Lake is perhaps Diamond Valley Lake. California has many acres of desert blooms that astonish with overwhelming numbers, but none so intimately beautiful as the floral paradise of Diamond Valley, here seen with poppies, goldfields, and baby blue eyes, with only a single cholla cactus in the distance to remind us that this is supposed to be a desert. Theodore Roosevelt once spoke of a beauty that bankrupts the English language. If ever appropriate, this phase certainly applies to the Santa Rosa Hills surrounding Diamond Valley Lake in spring, themselves within view of 3 snow-capped peaks, here seen beneath Mount San Jacinto. Poppies and chia are seen growing above the lake itself, another artificial lake. This is a view of the highlands from the flower trail, including the ubiquitous baby blue eyes blooming at the top between the mountains, here seen beneath Mount San Jacinto. Diamond Valley is known for its populations of poppies and Canterbury bells, intergrowing, and a lake overlook. Diamond Valley Lake, like Bartlett Lake, is an artificial lake, made by humans in this case to quench the thirst of the Inland Empire of California. Diamond Valley Lake is known for the eccentric combination of purple and gold from California Valley poppies and wild Canterbury bells, lending an almost psychedelic air to this amazing landscape. Here we see more wild Canterbury bells and poppy patches decorating the hillsides over Diamond Valley Lake. The poppies only grow thicker as the trail continues past the lake ledges. This photo shows 3 worlds: the desert, the hills in spring, and the San Bernardino Mountains in Diamond Valley. Also near Los Angeles, the Antelope Valley is found. Known as a floral paradise, in this photo, Phacelia is seen growing beneath the San Gabriel Mountains. Saddleback Mountain appears in this view, which features goldfields and Joshua trees. Elizabeth Lake, in the hills above the Antelope Valley, plays host to California poppies, lupins, phacelia, and popcorn flowers in this photo. Water rises along a fault, and faults determine the courses of erosion, which become the lays and coveys of the spring bloom. None of these is greater than the San Andreas Fault, pictured here decked out with bush lupins, so perfect it seems that they are at the boundary of nature's capabilities, and could have been designed by a sentient being. The scene is from Elizabeth Lake, again, at the edge of the Antelope Valley, beneath the San Andreas Fault. This photo shows a south-facing slope of the San Gabriel foothills near the Antelope Valley, covered with popcorn flowers, poppies, bush lupin, and goldfields. And this a slightly different view, with the same flowers. Goldfields are to California what bladderpod mustard is to Arizona, seen in billions and trillions of numbers here in the Antelope Valley beneath the San Gabriel Mountains. Between the Tehachapi and San Gabriel Mountains, this last wedge of the desert is in spring a never-ending carpet of goldfields and poppies, providing a momentary resting place for thousands of rolling tumbleweeds. With the heaviest rains come the owl clover, again becoming a rare sight in the desert in a changing climate. Once like the poppies, the owl clover stretched from horizon to horizon after a good year, an event that now comes only about once a few decades. The Antelope Valley is home to billions of California valley poppies. They work to dispel the myth that the desert is a lifeless void. The seeds of life are absolutely everywhere and only need the winter rains to transform a dead land into one not only bursting with life but confusable for a landscape of the supernatural. Here's a close-up of the same view. This photo shows the Antelope Valley, California Poppy Preserve, which protects billions of perfect orange flowers, the state flower of California. Across the river, outside of Phoenix, is to be found Black Mesa, itself an uninspiring basaltic outcrop, but in spring is bewreathed by flowers. Continuing into the Mazatzal Mountains, one comes across the Barnhart Trailhead, a home for sago lilies and strawberry hedgehog cacti. Sago lilies, growing amongst prickly pear cactus at the Barnhart Trailhead in the Mazatzal Mountains, are seen here. They are related to the Mariposa lily. An old legend surrounds how the Hopi taught Mormon settlers how to cook and eat the bulbs, which prevented a famine. In gratitude, the Mormons made the sago lily the state flower of Utah. At the same site, goldfields are found growing on a plateau underneath the Mazatzal Mountains. Goldfields are a member of the aster family, which thrive in poor soil. The state flower of Utah is just at home in Arizona in the highlands below the Mogollon Rim. Here we see the Mazatzal Mountains wreathed with sago lilies. Here is a close-up of the same view. Back in California, a little bit further north, Joshua trees are surrounded by goldfields at Red Rock Canyon State Park. Here we see goldfields beneath the Badlands. As the perennial bloom has a highland phase, so the annuals roll into the highlands and spill from south to north in April, here appearing at Red Rock Canyon State Park. This is Rooster Canyon. Goldfields flow along washes in this area. Washes are a convenient source of water, which explains the predominance of flowers along washes in the desert. Carrizo Plain is located between the Temblor and Caliente ranges in western California, and it is an enigma. It is located to the west of the fertile Central Valley of California, but receives less than 4 inches of rain in an average year, and is home to alkaline lakes that dry up completely, qualifying this landscape as a desert, likely caused by a rain shadow in the lee of the coast ranges. Here we find tidy tips and goldfields blooming around dry Soda Lake. In this photo, alkaline fingers of Soda Lake pierce a field of tidy tips and goldfields. The Caliente Range is seen from the lake shores of Soda Lake, surrounded by ledges of tidy tips. Further south in Carrizo Plain, a single desert candle blooms on the broad prairie near the center of the valley. As the climate becomes drier, the phenomenon of the bloom becomes rarer, and the truly great blooms, now known as super blooms, are exceedingly uncommon indeed, making episodes in which flowers literally cover hundreds of square miles a must-see event. In March and April 2017, tidy tips and goldfields filled the entire California Valley and conquered the surrounding hills of Carrizo Plain National Monument. What is the biological purpose of a superbloom? Billions of flowers are a coincidence of seeds and water, but what about trillions? In burned areas, they are a vital healing process, but there is no reason for these numbers in a healthy area. Those who study note a lack of correlation in pollinators with exceptional bloom years in the desert, with a 1-year lag typical in populations. It is a question that gets the better of scientific minds. At the far south end of the valley, carpets of Phacelia periodically interrupt the relentless flow of fiddleneck and goldfields. Here we see the entrance of the monument on the south, as goldfields surround one of the many plains' dry alkaline lakes. At a high point on the hills atop the San Andreas Fault Gouge, The San Emigdio Range is visible in the distance over the southern hills of the Carrizo Plain Monument. Here we see an ocean of fiddleneck and goldfields swaying in the windswept valley below the Temblor Range and Carrizo Plain. The Badlands are coated with flowers in good years, and after much rain, fiddlenecks and goldfields take over the landscape. Here we see fiddleneck and goldfields trapping a flotilla of tumbleweed growing in the coast ranges of California. Tumbleweed grow in the coast ranges and are carried by the wind across the Great Valley in the Mojave Desert. In the year of the superbloom, the hills to the east of Carrizo Plain were known as the Painted Hills, being overrun in that year with hillside daisy, phacelia, poppies, and Lindley's blazing star. The San Andreas Fault runs underneath the range, grinding up rocks into impenetrable cataclysite, which traps a layer of water near the surface where it could be tapped by thirsty desert flora. This is a view from the center of the Temblor Range in the year of the superbloom. Hillside daisy and goldfields covered the foothills of the Temblor Range that year at the edge of the Carrizo Plain National Monument. In this photo, we see yellow hillside daisy, purple phacelia, blue popcorn flowers, and orange Lindley's blazing star painting the Temblor Range. Ordinarily a pile of fault gouge with an almost fauvist air. The canyons leading west from the Temblor Range into the valley are themselves pathways for flowers to flow. Here, phacelia and hillside daisy are seen spilling down the hill slopes into the canyons. This photo shows a south-facing slope in the Temblor Range. The Temblor Range was alight that year with flowers run riot after an El Nino winter ended an 18-year drought in California. Back in Arizona, the Superstition Mountains form a backdrop for a rare double bloom, annuals and perennials, in late March at Florence Junction. In this photo, a great bank of lupins is seen. The Superstitions are a fantastically eroded, jagged remnant of volcanic activity made of layered ignimbrite or tuff that disguise 5 overlapping calderas or collapsed magma chambers. Here in the Western Range, only volcanic domes remain. The great perennial bloom of the brittlebush begins in the lowlands at basaltic outcroppings near Florence Junction, Arizona. Related to common sunflowers, brittlebush are flowering shrubs with silvery white leaves that reflect light, keeping them cool in the desert heat. The branches are brittle and contain a resin used in Native American ceremonies, leading to its Spanish name, incienso. Above Florence Junction is to be found Gonzales Pass. Here brittlebush begin to bloom, adding diversity to trailsides of desert marigolds and Perry's penstemon. Continuing into the mountains in the Mazatzal Range is a field of goldfields outside the aptly named town of Sunflower. And still, desert marigolds are to be found intergrowing with globe mellow or apricot mellow in the Mazatzal Mountains. High above the valley floor in the Mazatzal Mountains, brittlebush form a pattern as the bloom moves from the low foothills to the high foothills. Far to Arizona south is to be found Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument. The monument is a bellwether for the perennial bloom, with its brittlebush hinting at the quality of the bloom, as it is one of the first sites to bloom, in this case in early March. Below left, a butte in the Puerto Blanco Mountains, and right, Oregon pipe cactus overlook a field of scattered brittlebush a few miles north of Lukeville on the Mexican border. Growing only in extreme southern Baja California, Sonora, and Arizona, in its namesake national monument, the cactus known as Oul to the Ceris people is a source of sweet fruit which grows in late May and June and grows from the ground unlike the giant saguaro, which is far more abundant in the United States. Here we see a cactus field below the Ajo Mountains. The Ajo Mountain Arch overlooks the trailside brittlebush at Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument. Backlit cholla and brittlebush are to be found in hollows of the Ajo Mountains. High-pressure systems, with their heat and dryness, play a large role in determining whether a bloom will occur, how big, and what will be its nature. If there is steady rain, but high pressure appears too early, they shut out the rain, and the annual bloom with it. Typically, some brittlebush will bloom early due to the high temperatures, but a split bloom occurs, with the early flowers dying out as the new ones are blooming if rain returns. Such is the case with Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument in March of 2014. Here we see brittlebush blooming around the roots of the Oregon Pipe Cactus in the Ajo Mountains. Back in the suburbs of Phoenix, on the Peralta Trail, we see the strawberry hedgehog cactus in late March. It is an exhibition of the beauty of the Superstition Range. The Peralta Trail was named for a family of Mexican miners which worked a rich seam of gold before the arrival of Europeans. The trail is associated with the legendary Lost Dutchman mine. Here, brittlebush are found to be growing along the Peralta Trail. Up the road from the Peralta Trail location is the Silly Mountain Botanical Area, which is usually the victim of a split bloom, with flowers below the hillsides dying out as flowers above the hillsides begin blooming. In late March 2013, however, the entire hillside was aflame in thick brittlebush gold at twilight. Saguaro cacti grow over a hillside of pure brittlebush in this photo. Brittlebush have been described as the workhorses of the bloom for their sheer dominance of the areas in which they are found and the extensiveness to which they flower. Across the valley from Silly Mountain is to be found White Tank Mountain Regional Park, which later in the year experienced a double bloom of lupin and brittlebush. Here we see hillsides at White Tank Mountain Regional Park covered by blooming brittlebush. The Black Rock Canyon area in the park changes from a poppy garden to a brittlebush haunt in late March. And here the Bajada Trail, earlier seen dressed in poppies, is dressed in sunshine during the brittlebush bloom. Surrounding the area, the Black Rock Hills also were aflame in brittlebush flowers in March of 2017. Saguaro cacti are to be found growing amongst brittlebush in the hills and bajadas of the White Tank Mountains as the perennial bloom continues. This photo illustrates a curious phenomenon. A Phacelia patch is seen blooming around the remnants of a creosote bush. Creosote dominate an area so extensively in the desert due to the poison their roots emit, which prevents some plants from growing too near, but not the Phacelia, which can be seen sheltering near their roots when the bloom is widespread. On the other side of Phoenix, Flatiron Mountain is the final abutment of the Superstition Range, visible in Lost Dutchman State Park. In early April, it emerges from blankets of yellow brittlebush. Here the four peaks are visible over a large brittlebush patch from Lost Dutchman State Park. In 2015, the brittlebush exhibited a split bloom, which experienced two separate heating periods over the winter, causing some plants to bloom at different times. This photo looks downward from the Flatiron towards Lost Dutchman State Park. The park is named for Jacob Waltz, who took over the old Peralta family mine and concealed its location. The mine's location, said to have been discovered by a professional miner in recent years, remains a guarded secret. This photo shows desert marigold and thistles in an area along Sycamore Road northeast of Phoenix, known as the Devil's Potato Patch. Rhyolite boulders are the potatoes to be found in this area and are found surrounded by desert marigolds. Rocky outcrops and brittlebush are a common match in Arizona during the perennial bloom. Another scene from the Devil's Potato Patch, in which volcanic towers surround brittlebush patches. Strawberry hedgehog cacti flower between brittlebush providing a bit of color here and there in early April. The Devil's Potato Patch is located in the lower foothills of the Mazatzal Mountains. It is named for the rounded boulders that fall from the hillsides during exfoliation as they emerge from burial. Saguaro National Park East has been described as less dramatic and less impressive than Saguaro National Park West, with far fewer saguaros. However, visitors need only come in mid-spring to understand why this area still earns its stripes as part of the national park system. In this photo, we see fairy dusters and brittlebush blooming in Saguaro National Park East at sunset. Saguaro East is found across the valley from the Tucson Mountains, the other side of Saguaro National Park. In this view, the Tucson Mountains are visible. Hillsides and washes are full of blooming brittlebush between the Santa Catalina and Rincon Mountains in Saguaro National Park East. A wall of yellow is a common sight in spring at Saguaro National Park East as brittlebush intergrow with creosote, ocotillo, and prickly pear cactus. Once home to the thickest saguaro forest in the world, the forest slowly died out over the course of the 20th century to a plague known only as the cactus blight. Much of the giant cactus's former range has been taken over by brittlebush and prickly pear. Here we see javelina rocks, named for a relative of the peccary which still roams the Sonoran Desert. Brittlebush intergrows with prickly pear cactus in this photo. And in this, saguaro, cholla, ocotillo, prickly pear, and brittlebush are seen beneath the Santa Catalina Mountains at Saguaro National Park East. Brittlebush play an important role in the recovery of scarred landscapes, as do other flowers. In this photo, white zinnia patches occasionally surround saguaro cacti in mid-spring at Saguaro National Park. Strawberry hedgehog cacti grow along a patch of white zinnia below the Rincon Mountains, also in Saguaro National Park East. This photo shows an example of the strawberry hedgehog cacti in full bloom. Back in the Phoenix area, a double bloom of annual poppies and lupin with perennial brittlebush is in progress at Lake Pleasant Regional Park in this photo. Here we see the poppy portion. Poppies cover the lower hillsides along the pipeline trail as brittlebush dominate the hilltops. Brittlebush bloom on the upper slopes and hilltops of the rolling landscape of Lake Pleasant Regional Park, mixed with saguaro and palo verde. Scoriaceous hills make the perfect habitat for brittlebush, again at Lake Pleasant Regional Park. The vesicles in the rock provide drainage for the gravelly slopes, which trap vital water. Bright hillsides reach a crescendo of yellow near Castle Hot Springs inside the park. Maricopa County is unique in the United States for its support of these regional parks, many of which are ideal habitats for spring flowers. Saguaros here again are seen surrounded by brittlebush at Lake Pleasant. Lake Pleasant is home to one of the largest and densest clustering of brittlebush in Arizona. This photo shows the foothills of the San Bernardino Mountains, covered in brittlebush, a greeting for hikers passing through on the Pacific Crest Trail. Known in California as Encielia, a ring of brittlebush surrounds the Quachea Valley as the desert climbs above sea level and is no more spectacular than these alluvial flats at Mission Creek Preserve, where two snow-capped peaks stand watch in spring. This photo shows Mission Creek and Mount San Gorgonio, centerpiece of the newly established Santa Snow National Monument. This photo shows Mount San Jacinto opposite the valley. The Whitewater River, just a few miles west of Mission Creek, tumbles as it exits the gateway to the mountains, with foothills covered with brittlebush. The Whitewater River cascades down from the San Bernardino Range, carving out Whitewater Canyon Preserve, which is filled with brittlebush in spring. Like Mission Creek, San Jacinto towers over brittlebush-covered hillsides at Whitewater Canyon. Further south, we see the perennial bloom at the height of its glory in Montezuma Canyon at Anza Borrego Desert State Park. The boulders seen interstrewn between the flowers are known as monzonite. Just as the annual and perennial blooms may combine for a double bloom in good years, so the perennial bloom may combine with the cactus bloom. Here beavertail blooms intermix with brittlebush. Amongst the rocks at Montezuma Canyon are to be found pincushion cacti and strawberry hedgehog cacti in late March and early April. But the area is known more for being a source of good beavertail cacti, which grow among the brittlebush. Here we see a canyon leading up from the desert floor into the highlands, likewise coated with brittlebush and ocotillo. Here we see the Anza Borrego uplands covered with brittlebush mixed with pink pincushion cactus flowers. In the lowlands of Anza Borrego State Park, pincushion flowers would be found near the Agua Caliente Ranch. The area is also known as an ocotillo haunt, surrounded by cholla blooming yellow flowers in the spring. The cactus bloom, phase 2 of the perennial bloom, begins in the lowlands of Anza Borrego Desert State Park as phase 1 moves into the highlands. The cacti bloom earliest in California, with the Arizona cactus bloom still more than a month away. In this example, a beavertail cactus blooms near Yaqui Pass in early March. And this photo shows assorted cacti in bloom with red ocotillo blossoms in the background at Anza Borrego Desert State Park. The ocotillo, despite its spines, is not a cactus, but is instead related to the candlewood plant. This photo shows beryl cacti blooms in spring. Beryl cacti bloom in spring only in California, with the majority of Arizona beryls blooming in the monsoon season of late summer. Blooms here are overseen by Indian Head Peak near Borrego Springs. And here, looking down at the beryl cactus in bloom at Anza Borrego Desert State Park in California. In this photo, we see the pink blooms of the cholla, palo verde, and paper flower blooming in the foothills of the Santa Rita Mountains in the Vail Gap southeast of Tucson. Brittlebush, white zinnia, and ocotillo from the Rincon Valley are seen in this photo as Rincon Peak overlooks. And here is a photo of more white zinnia, desert marigolds, and brittlebush from the Vail Gap looking south into the Santa Rita Mountains. This photo shows the state tree of Arizona in full flower, known as the palo verde. They are to be found in the Vail Gap in full bloom above prickly pear. Cholla blossoms were especially prevalent in 2015 in the Vail Gap. In this photo, the Rincon Range forms a backdrop for an ocean of prickly pear cactus as they begin to bloom. And in this, prickly pear flowers are found in the Vail Gap with the Santa Rita Mountains in the background. The area is also known as the host for the Ocotillo Preserve, an area south of Corona de Tucson, in which tens of thousands of ocotillo bloom at once. In good years, the ocotillo's red flowers merge into a red stripe up against the foothills of the Santa Rita Mountains. In mid-April, the cactus bloom is in full sway at Saguaro National Park East. Above, a prickly pear produces a glorious crop of lively yellow blossoms. Saguaro East is known for its prickly pear. Tucson is a bright crown of thorns at Easter, and a cloudy day makes for great photographic opportunities to focus on individual cacti at Saguaro National Park East. Here, prickly pear cactus exhibit the range of their colorful blooms, mixing at times with the varied colors of the buckhorn cholla, such as these or these. Prickly pear may bloom yellow blossoms, but also can form orange blossoms and peach-colored blossoms, such as these. Some prickly pear are purple, such as these. Their yellow blooms make for a royal treat. Like the prickly pear, the cholla is able to bloom multicolored flowers, some from the same plant. In this case yellow, in other cases pink, in others red, in others orange. As the cactus bloom begins in Arizona, in California, the Joshua tree bloom has begun. Joshua trees are in full bloom in the Mojave Desert in April. Once classified as a lily, recent DNA studies confirm that Joshua trees are actually closer to the yucca Joshua trees have some of the deepest roots of any, digging deep to find the low water table deep in the desert. Claret cup cacti adds lively splashes of red to the dry landscape at Joshua Tree National Park in April, in this case seen beneath the Joshua tree. Here, Joshua trees in bloom and some bearing seed pods are seen beneath Mount San Gorgonio. The park hosts many Joshua tree forests, including this one between the Wonderland of Rocks and the Little San Bernardino Mountains. Lost Horse Valley is home to the largest Joshua tree forest in the national park and hosts some of the largest and most ornate examples of its unique namesake. Arms reaching to heaven, each branch of the Joshua tree bears a flowery bundle. This photo shows a close-up of the bloom near the end of its cycle as seed pods begin to form. Here we see flowers and seed pods intermixed. On the south side of the park, the Ocotillo patch is in bloom in this photo. In a dry year, the Ocotillo will nonetheless spend its resources to bloom flowers rather than leaves. In western Arizona, the cactus bloom continues, with beavertail cactus here at Harkivar Pass. The trees and the cacti in Arizona bloom at the same time. In this case, Palo Verdes are seen beneath Guadalupe Mountains in Arizona's western desert. Joshua trees are not unique to California, here being found at the Tres Alamos Wilderness. The Tres Alamos Wilderness is a haven for Joshua trees along Arizona's Joshua Tree Parkway. The area is one of the very few places where Joshua trees may be photographed in the same frame as saguaro cacti. That is because it is a transition zone between the Sonoran and Mojave deserts. Here, Arizona's state tree, the Palo Verde, shines forth its flowers beneath the Santa Catalina Mountains at Catalina State Park. In this photo, Palo Verdes light up a view of Oracle Ridge on the nature trail. Push Ridge and Table Mountain, surrounded by hills of Palo Verdes, one of the many splendors of late spring in Catalina State Park, which includes this high ridge, in which Palo Verdes grow thick enough to form a wall. Catalina State Park is one of the best places to see the saguaro bloom, also in May, concurrently blooming with Palo Verdes. This photo shows a ball bloom at Sabino Canyon. Other examples follow from Sabino Canyon, including this one. But the best place to see the saguaro in bloom is undoubtedly Saguaro National Park West in the Tucson Mountains, west of Tucson. There, saguaros and Palo Verdes bloom together. This place is known as Esquiminzin and is named for an Apache chief. It is located at the center of Saguaro National Park West. Here is an example of one of the many saguaro blooms visible in the area. This is a west view from the center of Saguaro National Park West in May. It is filled with the yellows of Palo Verdes, the Arizona state tree, and saguaros, which bear the Arizona state flower. Esquiminzin is known for its thick walls of saguaro cacti. Here, the wall of thickly grown saguaros is topped with flowers. This shows many of the iconic saguaro examples near the Visitor Center at Saguaro National Park West, including this iconic saguaro forest. In the Tucson Mountains, blossoms of an ironwood tree, so named for the hardness and density of its wood, which sinks in water, are to be found. Ironwoods grow to be 800 years old and are found only on the Oracle granite and its regional equivalents. They are vital nurse plants for the saguaro in their critical younger years. This ironwood tree was caught at the height of its 4-day bloom in the Tucson Mountain Park in May. This photo shows Gates Pass. Gates Pass features a wash in which concentrated ironwoods grow, such as these. In this photo, Ragged Top Mountain forms the backdrop for purple blooming ironwood trees in Ironwood Forest National Monument. Ironwood nurse trees surrounding saguaro flowers with their sheltering blooms form a perfect complement to one another. Here is another example of an ironwood tree in its eponymous National Monument. Saguaro cacti seem to be emerging from purple flames in this photo. And in this photo, we see the ironwood tree framing a view of Ragged Top Mountain. Ironwoods, like Palo Verdes, are mainly to be found along washes where they commonly intergrow, such as this very large example. As deserts go, many are lucky to have one bloom season. The Sonoran Desert has two, due to the monsoon season, which occurs from June to September each year. The monsoon, the second and heaviest wet season to affect the Arizona deserts, creates a crop of prickle poppies in the Dragoon Mountains southeast of Tucson. Scientifically known as Argemone polyanthemus, the Greeks used a relative of this poisonous flower as a cure for cataracts. Prickle poppies in this photo carpet the desert near Council Rocks, a meeting place for the Chiricahua Apache in the Dragoon Mountains. Cochise, the Apache leader, used this area's rocky landscape as a stronghold against U.S. Army troops who were constantly searching for him. Here we see the Dragoon Mountains from the south. Purple-throated longleaf morning glory, a vine flower, snakes its way along pathways and roadsides in the Dragoon Mountains. The smaller version of morning glory finds its way through dense grass in the Dragoon Mountains. When rain is plentiful but well spaced, flowers take over this landscape. The fragile monsoon bloom depends on well-timed rains, as too much rain all at once creates a grassland that chokes out the flowers. Pinal Pass is one of the gateways providing an access point to the Gila River from the Tucson area. It is a home for century plants. Here a century plant is in full flower in June. June is a good time to visit Pinal Pass for its plethora of century plant blooms. Here a quad is seen on the dry slopes of Pinal Pass. A dense collection of century plants flowers in June, heralding the monsoon season. Contrary to their name, century plants do not take 100 years to bloom. Rather, they store food to support their central stalks, which can take several decades to flower. Once it blooms, the stalk dies and eventually falls over. Century plants intergrow with prickly pear and Mormon tea at Pinal Pass. Pinal Pass forms a gap in the Mescal Mountains, which separate the San Pedro and Gila River valleys. Caltrop flowers are distinguished from poppies by having 5 rather than 4 petals. They are also to be distinguished from the hated goat's head caltrop, also known as puncture weed, to which they are not related. They are the flower that is the most associated with the monsoon bloom in Arizona. Commonly confused for poppies, but actually more closely related to creosote, Arizona caltrop is the signature bloom of the monsoon season, which lasts from June to September. Here caltrop sprinkles its orange blooms on a hillside above Arivaca Lake. Arizona caltrop and peppergrass find a home in the rolling hills in the Tumacacori highlands of southern Arizona, on ledges above Arivaca Lake. In good years, the flowers surround the lake in every direction. Another good place to see Arizona caltrop in bloom is at Arivaca Junction on the way to Arivaca Lake. Continuing south towards the Mexican border, velvet pod mimosa begins to be seen. Velvet pod mimosa is found in the far south of Arizona. Here in this photo, it forms a foredrop to an overlook in Patagonia Lake State Park. Here is a close-up of a mature example. Velvet pod mimosa forms a thick hillside shrubscape with Ocotillo at Patagonia Lake State Park. Here, hillsides of Santa Cruz County, Arizona are alive with pink and white velvet pod mimosa in the monsoon season, when the desert turns from brown to green. Another signature flower of the monsoon bloom is the beryl cactus. In Arizona, blooming in the monsoon season rather than in early spring, beryl cacti blooms eventually close and become fruit following their August bloom season. Unlike the fishhook beryl found in the California lowlands, Arizona beryl cacti bloom during the summer rains. Corona de Tucson, with its fields filled with prickly pear cactus, is an ideal location to experience the beryl bloom. when the stubby barrel cacti bud their startling red and orange blooms amid a sea of prickly pear cactus. Like the saguaro, each barrel blossom opens individually, day by day, until a full circle appears on the top of the cactus. This photo shows a field of barrel cacti and prickly pear cacti in Corona de Tucson beneath the Santa Catalina Mountains. And this is one of the most unusual cacti I've ever seen. It is a pentuple barrel cactus bloom. It was also found in Corona de Tucson. This photo shows a view of Rincon Peak with barrel cactus during the monsoon season. One of the signature blooms of the desert is the sage bloom, and is one of the final events of the botanic year. It finds itself at home among the monoliths of Monument Valley in September. Here, rabbit brush is seen before West Mitten. Fields of sage and rabbit brush erupt in yellow, complementing the red rocks of John Ford Point in Monument Valley. This area is known as the Hub. Rabbit brush covers the desert floor at Monument Valley. Navajo dyers create a yellow dye from its flowers. Rabbit brush, like goldfields, a member of the aster family, complement Arizona and Utah red rock country, as well as the grand finale of the bloom. Continuing north into the Colorado Plateau, we find the La Salle Mountains at Spanish Valley. Aptly named snakeweed blanket Spanish Valley with the La Salle Mountains as a backdrop. Known for its ability to cause miscarriages if consumed, it is toxic to cattle, although believed to be a remedy for snake bites by the Ute and Paiute people. In this photo, the autumn gold of quaking aspen can be seen on the flanks of the mountain as summer meets fall. Here we see snakeweed again at Spanish Valley. In the foothills of the La Salle Mountains, flowers rise to meet the descending colors of fall, bringing the great west bloom to a close. Thank you for watching.